Welcome back to another indie fantasy review, where today we're going to be talking about Wolfeater by Anthony Mitchell. Now, you may notice that I don't have the physical copy with me. That is because I read it as an ebook, but I will be getting the physical copy to add to my shelf, but that's why it's a little bit bare over here. Now, a couple things about this book. It is a standalone, but the author has written other books that take place in this same universe, the same world. I'd say it's about 150,000 words, and it's written from multiple POVs, and ultimately it's about a doomed man that goes on a journey to confront the gods. So let's give a quick overview. This story is about a region that is basically a frozen wasteland. All of the surrounding tribes in this area are starving to death and are basically in a desperate search for any food that they can find. This is where we're introduced to some of our main characters, including Senya, who's part of the Wolf tribe, and Radok, also known as the Wolfeater, hence the name, who is part of the Gray Crow tribe. And let me tell you, those two tribes do not get along. Now, after an initial skirmish between these two characters over some much needed bison, Radok returns to his tribe, but is very quickly overtaken by this long-standing disease that he's been struggling with. After serving the gods faithfully all his life, he doesn't really understand why he would be subjected to such a cruel end. He would have much preferred to die in battle or something like that. So he decides to just confront the gods himself. He takes with him a young blind girl that he's basically adopted as his daughter, because in these clans, weakness is kind of shunned. But his tribe leader sets off to stop him from confronting the gods because he believes that's blasphemy. Now, Senya is also hunting the Wolfeater for multiple reasons, but essentially it's to earn a name for herself as the woman who killed the Wolfeater. So it was a journey and a hunt. It's a refreshingly simple premise that explored the purpose of life as these different groups trekked through this frozen wilderness. So with all that in mind, let's dive into this indie review. The Immersion I had to give a 7 out of 10 because although it did have depth regarding this frozen tundra, it did kind of start to feel a little bit one note. So it was a very simple world. We knew that it was cold. But because there's just all these different tribes and they're somewhat nomadic, we don't get as much of a deep dive into the religions that they believe or the different politics. You just know that some of these tribes hate each other, but it doesn't explore it a lot in depth. So again, the different tribes that are in this place, they just have different beliefs and traditions. They're very just barbaric and nomadic people. I do like when it starts to tease more with especially the Radok character, where he's just different from everyone else, and that's always set him apart. So it hints that the world is larger than they think it is. He kind of essentially washed up into this place. They adopted him as part of their tribe. He had to earn his place. So that's very interesting. It does hint that there's more here than just this frozen wasteland. And him as a character was very dynamic. So yeah, the world building was just very simple. So if you like books that aren't super in depth and that are going to bog you down with a bunch of world building, this one's really easy to grasp. You can jump right into it, and it's a lot of fun to read. As for the names, I had to give this a 7 out of 10. I loved Radok the Wolfeater. Just this archetype and trope of a really highly skilled warrior, deadly individual, but also that has a soft heart for the vulnerable. Where other people would discard any weakness, he sees that as an opportunity to protect and provide for the less fortunate. So that kind of also sets him apart from his tribe. So I like that there's a little bit of depth there with him, where even though he's this archetype of a very powerful warrior, he does have that sensitive side to him, and he does try to protect his people. I also like that he has an incurable lung disease, and just because of his personality, he just decides to take it straight to the gods, cut through the middleman instead of waiting to deteriorate and die. He wants to go out with a fight. He wants to know the reason for his fate after all that he's given. I love that dynamic because you see this deterioration of this powerful warrior. You know he has a reputation, but more and more his decline just prevents him from being able to do what he needs to do to get to where he needs to go. Senya was okay. Sometimes I wondered why we needed her in the story. Like, I get that she's driven by revenge in the initial part of the story. That's good, but that just starts to become hollow to me after a while. Like, she's given enough opportunities to kind of have different motivations, and it just sticks with this one note I want to get revenge. I want to kill the Wolfeater. And to me, it just starts to feel a little bit shallow. I think that you could have folded in a little bit more depth with that character, rather than just making that her persistent motivation. Mikolov was great. Very similar character to the Legend of the Wolfeater, except he was on the other side of the battle. So you have these two legendary warriors who have never actually fought each other, who are now essentially just peaceful old men who are forced to go on these journeys. So that was a lot of fun to see. And Talak was an interesting antagonist. Again, maybe a little bit flat, but I didn't have a ton of issues with him. Again, he just kind of seemed like the typical antagonist. So I had a couple issues with the characters. One is that it started to become a little bit repetitive, and you would do info dumps in the dialogue. I don't like info dumps in dialogue. It is one of those things that takes me out of the experience, where I feel like they're just telling each other things they already know, or things that they should know, or it just doesn't feel like an authentic conversation when someone goes on a big blurb about the history of why things are happening, especially if they're a really unique character. So again, that dialogue kind of takes me out, which brings me to point number 2. There were some of those instances where there was just more telling than showing with these characters. Like, you're telling me that Radok is this scary person when I would rather see people fear him rather than telling me that they're afraid, if that makes sense. And this is a small one, but for me, the characters lost an entire half a point when you gave the wolf a POV. That was ridiculous. I didn't see any reason to have that. It's supposed to be this emotional climactic moment, but by making it from the POV of the wolf, oh, I hated that. I would have way rather seen that from Mikolov's point of view than the wolf. It's just giving the wolf sentience for half a chapter. No, that's not for me. Hated that. Hated it. If it had been more consistent from the beginning all the way through, maybe I probably still wouldn't loved it. But yeah, I hated that he had a POV. Hated that. The magic is going to get a 6.5. And part of the reason for that is there wasn't a ton of magic in the story. But when there was, I just had some issues with it. I just think there was a few inconsistencies or some questions that I had about it. So maybe it's not a huge deal for you. For me, it kind of left me wanting. So yeah, for me, the magic was just a little too simple. The magic is basically like becoming some type of prophet where you can hear the will of what needs to happen for the world. But at the same time, each tribe has their own prophet that listens to the same will. So if they're all following the same will, why do they each have different prophets that clash with each other all the time? Or that have different beliefs or ideologies? You would think that if they're all following the same voice, they would be all driven towards the same goal, the same ambition, the same unity, whatever it may be. So, I could see an argument one way or the other for it, where, prophets have different ways of interpreting things, maybe. I don't know. I think that if that was the case, you would have had to fold that in a little bit better into the story. Now, as far as the creatures go, the Kragan was an awesome creature. Just this mammoth of a bear creature that just was incredible to read about. Like, just imagining a giant polar bear crazed out of its mind to kill you, and just seeing how powerful that was just super fun to read. And I really wish we would have got more creatures like that throughout, especially seeing what you were able to do to develop that thing. I wanted to see more things like that after experiencing that type of scene with all these warriors trying to survive this encounter with that beast. Also, one of the things that I thought was intriguing was that old blind lady who kind of kept reappearing out of nowhere. She was an interesting element to the magic that, again, I think could have used a little more development. But I also liked it as just kind of hinting that she was there, that maybe she had a grander purpose. She was very interesting. I did like her a lot. Now let's talk about the infrastructure of the book. I'd give it an 8.5 out of 10 because although it's simple, it is compelling. It does make you want to keep reading the pages. The pacing is really good. The tone and the voices, I think, are really well developed. The overall drive as we're moving forward towards this final destination keeps us engaged and interested in it as they're hitting these different problems to overcome, as they're searching for their ultimate goal. I think is structured really well. It also helps that it's a small cast of characters in a relatively small area, so it's really easy to follow. It's easy to understand what's going on and where they're headed. And like I said, it's a simple journey where Radok is going to confront the gods, and a simple hunt where Senya wants to kill Radok, along with other people that are trying to hunt him down too. So it's one man trying to find a destination while other groups are trying to hunt him down. So very simple premise, really easy to grasp, but at the same time, very interesting to see how it all plays out. My one maybe like plot hole or issue that I had with the story is the premise is that Radok is going to steal these bison because they're running out of food. Everyone's running out of food. And yet throughout this whole journey, everyone seems to have plenty of food. So, like, if that's your premise, that everyone is starving to death, like, I want to see them, like, eating tree bark or something because they're starving. Something like that shows me, wow, there's a huge scarcity of food if this is what they're resorting to. So, that was my one small issue with maybe, like, a plot hole type thing. But, you know, it's small. I could overlook it. It didn't take me out of the story, but I did think that was maybe a small problem. Now my enjoyment was a 7 out of 10. Let's start with the things that I liked about it. I liked the premise and the simplicity of this story. I liked that it starts off with a really clear conflict between two opposing characters, and it just kind of cascades into bigger problems that just drive the story forward. I thought that was really well done. Again, really engaging. I liked reading it. I was interested in keeping the story going because I did want to see how it ended. So that part of it was really good. I also liked the history of the characters. Again, the backstory of Radok, the backstory of Mikolov, I think were super interesting to see kind of warriors who have gone past their prime, who are no longer at the front lines of battle, who kind of are retired more or less, and kind of how their lives ended up as some of the survivors of these countless conflicts between these bloody tribes. And then I also liked the sense of bleakness that came from this world. Like, you could just feel the desperation and the exhaustion from how cold everything was and how hopeless things felt. That was very, very clear in the story, and I enjoyed getting a sense of that on every page. Now I want to talk about some of the things that I didn't like very much. So one of the things, again, I mentioned before is the dialogue. I felt like a lot of times we had repetitive dialogue. So in addition to the info dumps, I think that this author explained the Wolfeater's background like 6 different times, the exact same way. So it's like, we know who the Wolfeater is. Stop telling us. Like, we get it. We know who he is. Stop telling us. Move on with the story. Give us more context. And if you're going to tell us more about his story, give us things that we don't already know. Super frustrating. That was like, every time I saw a character starting to talk about Radok, I would just roll my eyes because it would be the exact same thing. I do not like repetitive dialogue. And the second thing were just info dumps throughout the story. Just getting those dumps in the middle of like action or dialogue, it just kind of takes me out of the story, where it just doesn't feel authentic to how these characters would speak or what they would say. And I like it more when there's realness to the characters, where maybe there's some internal dialogue going on, where there's some miscommunication and conflict, rather than the communication always being super clear between two characters. It's just, to me, not realistic, and it takes away from the personalities of these people. Don't rob personality for the sake of giving me context. I would rather have questions or fill in the gaps myself than to get info dumps every 10 pages. So that leaves us with an overall score of 7.2 out of 10. Not a bad book at all. Again, if you want an easy read that is a standalone that you can just crush through to experience this frozen tundra world, I'd recommend it. I think that it is good. Do I think that it has some issues? Obviously. But I don't think their issues were significant enough that I would DNF this story. For me, it only happened relatively infrequently, where it was enough that I noticed it, but not enough that I was like, okay, I can't continue. Keep that in mind, and if this sounds like something that you would enjoy, feel free to pick it up. Now, since I don't have the physical copy with me, you'll have to bear with me as I give a quick little design review. I loved the cover. I thought the cover was really well done, really unique. I felt like I think a lot of covers sometimes feel a little bit like AI generated or a little bit stock, so they kind of all start to blend together. But I like the artistic style of this one, where it was almost looked like a painting where Radok and this blind child are facing off against all their enemies. It just paints a really vivid picture of what we are promised in this book. And then the map is pretty good. I mean, it's very simple, but then again, it's a pretty simple world. So I think for what it is, it works pretty well, because essentially they're just going to one destination. You really only know like 3 points on the map, and that's enough for you to basically know everything you need to about the story and the world. So eventually I'm going to get this one on the shelf. But for now, that's it for this review. I just wanted to give a quick shout out and a thank you to all the indie authors who have submitted books to me. I am getting through those. I am reading them and trying to work through them as fast as I can, because I appreciate you sending them to me. So I want to do everything I can to make sure I'm giving it my full attention, my full priority. But I did get a few submissions for that, so I'm just working down the list. So if you haven't heard from me, just know that I'll get to it and I will add you to the list as soon as I can. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to join the club so that you can also support indie authors in the fantasy community. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.